you guys have been filling up the Q&A. I can see there's dozens of responses already on it. In order to make this slightly easier for myself and Chaplain Patty, I'm going to have Yusra, one of our fearless twin turns, inshallah, um, uh, read aloud a question, inshallah. And I believe the question and answer session had, if whether it was going towards Chaplain Patty or myself. So if you could just give us a question and we'll comment on it.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you guys for the amazing conversation. Okay, so the first question is for both chaplains. The question is, if I met someone that I like and that person feels the same way, knowing that we want to be together the halal way, what should we do? We are young but don't want to be haram. What should we do? And there were a couple of questions I think that were similar.
Patty?
Yeah, I mean, I you know, I always, the counselor in me wants to ask kind of questions of, you know, what are you talking about? But, you know, I think that what I will say overall is that when we're talking about this idea of the middle path and we're talking about this idea of restoring fitra, that part of this is really, you know, putting the love for marriage back in society. Part of the what's happening in the greater society is, you know, and again, within the last, you know, century, is you now have more stigma for marriage in the large stream society than you do for adultery, right? You have more stigma for marriage than you do for pornography, right? So when you go out into the mainstream society, if you tell people you want to get married young, they act like it's a human rights violation, like it's a really stupid thing. Like what exactly have we defined marriage as, that we think that pornography and that we think that adultery is better than marriage, you know? And one of the things that we want, and I know like one of the conversations that we hear in the community is now people are saying, well, your brain doesn't develop until you're 25 fully, so you should wait until after that to get married because then you'll have less likely to have divorce rate and all of these kind of studies, right? But those studies aren't looking at these other aspects of the fitra and the preservation of the human being. You know, they're just asking about divorce. They're not asking about your mental health. They're not asking about your deen. They're not asking about your struggles with the gays or any of these kind of things. You know, so when we have to think about like, okay, you, even if you're under 25 and you're still a developing person, right? That you want to be developing yourself just like you're in your studies and you're putting your full effort into it, to be a balanced whole person, that as a young person you should also be training yourself for relationships. You should be training yourself to be in communication and in consideration of another human being, right? And so I would encourage all of you to, you know, to really try and pick this back up, to really pick up this idea of marriage as fitra, not just as like, okay, I have lust and I want to get married and for that, but to really understand like what does it mean to have human connection and the responsibility of it, the caring for one another, and to be, and to have the courage, right, to try and take it on. And I know y'all have to talk, you know, you have to talk to your parents and families and society about this as well. But you know, if people are interested in getting married, you know, you want to be able to have a conversation with your families. You know, you can approach your chaplains, you can approach you know, people like this to try and help you have the conversations on premarital counseling, right? And you know, sometimes, you know, people will come to us and someone might be like, I'm interested in this person, and we may scope it for them, right? And find out, is this person ready to get married or not? So that's there. Sometimes two people are already talking and then they'll come and be like, okay, what is our process? And, you know, we can sit, we can go through counseling, we can talk about how we're going to have the conversations with the family and all of these different kinds of things. I'm sorry if that was a long answer, but.
No, I think that was a great answer. I'm actually just going to build on it slightly. He's been quoted a lot this night, but Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi has an interesting quote in which he says that love and attraction, if in our tradition is expressed with responsibility, it uplifts the soul. Love and attraction, if it is expressed without responsibility, it will destroy it. And what he meant to say by this is, I'm gonna that for marriage to work, for someone who wants to be married to someone and appreciate like the institution of marriage, it comes with the responsibility of being with that person. I'm actually not a fan of even the idea of like, let's get nikah now and then we'll live together in 5 years. I think that's a terrible idea. Not because it's not hot, it's because we just want to make it halal. I'm not a fan of that. And this is actually as someone who counsels probably around 35 couples a year or so. Not a fan of this nikah, and then later on we'll do a walima and we'll start living together. So right now we almost have like a marriage light. Marriage was meant to be consumed as an entire package because it builds, all of the things build on each other. If you just have the good parts of marriage and then you get the responsibilities later, that's called dating, and it doesn't work. There's a divorce rate of 62%. That it does not work. So that's one element of this. But on the other element, there is an idea, and I can very much appreciate that we want to keep things halal. And I think that's awesome, mashallah, and that's the approach that everyone should always have, that we want to make sure that we don't do anything wrong. But I have to respectfully actually give the analogy of, if two 12-year-olds found out that they are perfect for each other, right? Just this is supposed to make us kind of like jarred and like weird. Like if you told two 12-year-olds and they find out they were perfect for each other, was that wise for them to find out that they're perfect for each other? No, because what would you tell them? That is practically useless. And if anything, you're gonna keep beating yourself up that like we can't be together. Why? Because we're 12-year-olds. Like we can't be together. And it was also unwise to figure out that we're perfect for each other. Why? Because by the time we are gonna be able to act on this perfect compatibility, it won't be a perfect compatibility because 12-year-olds are not the same as 20-year-olds. Like you will change by then. So this is where I think practicality needs to be understood. And practicality oftentimes means that really understand, what are my timeline situations in terms of when I can actually take on a companion in my life, start a family with someone. And then also, once that's done, what are the steps that need to be made to make that happen? What I mean by that is that sometimes we have an unrealistic standard in our head that it needs to be when I have a house and 2 cars. Like it's something ridiculous like that, or like I'm completely done with my career. And I have to oftentimes ask that question of like, who made that stipulation and why did you go along with it? If it seriously seems like, no, this companion's going to help me achieve my goals, they seem to want the same things I do, then make the effort, and this is going to hurt like crazy to hear, but make the effort to start telling the supporters slash stakeholders of your life that, hey, we need to really talk about what this date is, because I don't think it should be that far out. And when you're serious enough to start and initiate that conversation, you're going to start becoming seriously enough to make the appropriate accommodations to move that date closer and closer. But if the situation arrives that you cannot move that date by any means, the other part I say is, marriage is not the only form of companionship. Don't misquote me on this. I don't mean this to say that people are supposed to go dating and have other romantic interests. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the idea of having a companion who is responsible, who tells you courageous speech when it's the time for courageous speech, like makes you better, who you serve. There's other halal relationships. That's your friends. That's your family. Oftentimes, these are people who are supposed to be practicing becoming, practicing becoming a good husband is being a good friend, is being a good son, is being a good brother.
Roommate.
Those were all roommate, sure, add whatever, pet owner. When you have kids, that one will make sense. But all of these things are training you for that huge hat that you're eventually going to wear of being a partner of someone. So start practicing it earlier on. That is not the only way of getting that need met. So those are the slight things. With any of these questions, I always have to make this disclaimer, especially when you're talking to 2 chaplains. Like, we're huge proponents of talking to someone and sounding out and literally like tracking with understanding where the question comes from, where that question is leading, what it says about the way you think. So I highly encourage that if you want more specific answers, reach out to either Chaplain Patty or myself individually, and we'll provide, inshallah, our email addresses at the end. Chaplain Patty already did that, so awesome.
Thank you both for that. So the next question is for Chaplain Patricia. And the question is, we actually got a couple of these. The question is, as a female, how do you go about pursuing someone in a halal way? So it's kind of similar, but it's more gender specific.
Yeah, I think that, I'm a big fan of, the model of Khadija radiallahu anha, right? I think that sometimes when you end up having interest in someone, it's probably there's some kind of connection, right? And so you want to be able to do, to sort of investigate. Does that make sense? In a way that, preserves the relationship if it doesn't work out. Does that make sense? And preserves your ability to interact. Who is a trusted third party, right? That can, not going to gossip, not going to do whatever, but can do, these sort of checks, right? And if we remember, like the check of Khadija's friend was first like, hey, I noticed you're single. Have you thought about getting married? What are the obstacles to getting married? Like and getting those answers and then going, well, if there was someone, would you consider? And then what about so and so, right? And so figuring out who those neutral parties are, and a lot of times, like I say, that's something that your chaplain could be that person, or an imam or someone like that. Someone that is trusted and knows both of you is usually, the best part. If you don't know who that person is that knows best people, then there's a networking approach, right? So kind of have the conversation with the chaplain or have a conversation with whoever you do know and strategize, like, okay, who can we ask? Maybe you go to the imam and you're like, well, I know this person is friends with so-and-so, right? And then the imam can talk to so-and-so and it doesn't get tracked back to you at all, right? But you can get that kind of initial status. Maybe they're already engaged, maybe they're already talking to someone, maybe they have very specific criteria, and by getting that answer, you can kind of move on in life, right? And if not, then it can be, like I say, gradually facilitated.
Yeah, not that I want to add too much onto that question, but or the answer. I think very well put together. I would just add one thing of trying to find someone. I get this question a lot, and one answer I have to give is the best way to find someone is, and it's going to sound like a counterintuitive point, but it's to not be looking just for someone to get married to. And what I mean by that is, if you are actively engaged and doing things in your life that are valuable to you, whether that means at work, whether that means at your masjid, at a place that you volunteer, at a place that you socially interact with people. If you're actively doing that, chances are you're going to run into someone who is more compatible with you, rather than going to a certain place in which you have to fill out a questionnaire on, oh, so what do you like to do? Like, you're way less probable to find someone who is in the same line as you in that space than you are in another space where you're actually living what is important to you. So oftentimes the best advice is, we're supposed to have centers in which people are supposed to meet, and I think a big conversation can be had here about like appropriate, respectful, yet meaningful interactions between brothers and sisters that should go on in our public spaces, that allows people to know each other's personalities without becoming intimate. Because when we don't have modeled good behavior between the genders, you know what starts happening? As soon as someone texts you, because you don't have a proper understanding of how to professionally communicate with a brother or a sister, suddenly it's like, oh no, this is haram anyway, might as well take it to its haram conclusion. Like, that starts to take place, rather than, or as soon as someone just says salam or reaches out to you, you have like, what do they have in mind? And like they have memes about this. Like someone asks you about something, oh, they must be asking for my they must want to get married to me. Like they said salam today. They're gonna talk to my dad next. Like, no, like there can be appropriate interactions between people where you can figure out their personality without getting intimate with them. And the I think this answers a couple of the other questions I just started scrolling through. How you know if you're ready for marriage is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says that marry people for 4 reasons. And those 4 reasons the Prophet ﷺ mentions is their beauty. Beauty does not mean the way they look. That is one part of their beauty. Beauty also means the way they speak. When they open their mouth, do you want to hear what comes next? That's also part of beauty, their sense of humor. Whether they, their habits, those are all part of someone's beauty. Marry someone for their wealth. Wealth doesn't mean how much money they have. Wealth means what is their relationship to wealth. When they have wealth, what do they do with it? Are they someone who values experiences? Are they someone who values things? How do they treat wealth? Marry someone for their family. How do they treat their family? What do they think about family? What do they think about a future family? And marry someone for their deen, their akhlaq, the operating clause with how they interact with the world around them and also their creator. And what needs to happen for all of these is look at the trajectory of the other person. But I'm actually going to flip the hadith. If the Prophet had married someone for these 4 things, that means how do you know that you're ready for marriage? When you are satisfied with your trajectory for these 4 things. Doesn't mean you're completely satisfied with it, but let's just say my beauty. I know where I was, I know where I am, and I know where I'm headed. I can prove where I'm going with my beauty. Beauty means my intellect, the way I speak, the way I present myself, the way I look even. Family. How do I treat my family? How did I used to treat them? And how can I show that I'm bettering it where it is right now? And this is an indication of how I'm going to treat my family in the future. Wealth. How do I know a lot of you are going to be like, well, I'm broke. And yeah, most of you are broke, mashallah. May Allah give you the lessons that are of the virtues that come from being broke. I mean, but the money you do have, how do you spend it? What are the habits that you've built up? What were they? What are they? And is that proof of how you're going to be in the future? And of course, your deen. Where was I? Where am I? Where am I? And is that a good enough proof to show to someone of where I will be? Once you're satisfied with your trajectory on these 4 parts of your life, you'll know whether you're ready for marriage.
Okay, thank you for that, Chaplain Kaiser. That definitely hit a couple of the other questions or more. So we're going to move on to another question for both of you. So the question is, loneliness and mental health concerns are growing amidst America's youth. COVID has amplified that exponentially. An easy refuge is for us to use these things that are largely impermissible by our deen. How do we approach cognitive dissonance surrounding the difficulties of controlling our gaze, where I feel like a bad person, I feel like a bad Muslim, I feel guilt and shame and further isolation, which then pushes us further into these actions? For people who struggle with the use of controlling our gaze, where can they go to combat these struggles?
SubhanAllah. I'll start because I feel like I've been always speaking second, which I always appreciate. So I'm going to take that task in this time of having you go second, inshallah. This is I can tell just from the way the thought that this question was written that this is there's a lot going on here. And my first recommendation would be to explicitly write out your narrative, how you've gotten to the point that you've gotten. And I feel that even part of that question started doing that, of you're starting to address, hey, this happened the first time at this point, then it got worse with this, then it got worse with this. You're tracking the narrative of what you think is sinful or shameful behavior. Recognize that that guilt is not a sign of you being a bad Muslim, but actually a sign of you having iman in your heart. That's actually a good thing. It is not a bad thing. We're a tradition that says shame is not to be inflicted on you from other people. Shame is what you feel in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And guilt is not something you pose on other people. Guilt is something you feel on yourself. And that's actually a sign of iman. So I want that to be kind of recognized here, is the guilt that is felt and the shame that is felt is actually a sign of iman, of a live heart, not of a dead heart. So that's first and foremost. To care about this is more than half the battle already. But from here on, what can be done? Again, make a narrative of how you've gotten to how you've gotten, and then start making a narrative to how you're gonna get out of this. And what that means is a gradual process in which you start literally undoing what this thing has taken away from you. This thing has made it so you don't feel motivated anymore. This thing has made it so that your relationships in your life are terrible. This thing has made it so that you're not passionate about anything anymore. Well, let's start undoing it little by little by little. But the first I don't want to call this the first step, because I hate saying that there's necessary steps, because everyone's going to have their own way of addressing this. But what I found to be a consistent thing that people have told me that changed this, that went from trying to quit to actually succeeding to quit, was when they added accountability into the mix. And what that means is, after you've internalized your narrative, tell it to someone else and actually have that person track with you. Mm-hmm. That's a really hard step, because no one wants to admit this. And yes, this isn't in an anonymous form. This is literally someone who you care about their opinion of you. It could be a friend, it could be a sibling, it could be a mentor, but they track with you. And they're going to hold you accountable, that when you mess up, they're going to be like, hey, we need to get you back on your game, because you're going to have days in which you feel terrible, but they can get you through them. And then you're going to have days in which things are going to be awesome. And this is more of a general comment, but I don't think we give intimacy to those we should be giving intimacy to. And what I mean by that is, for someone to help you out and literally help you put your life together could be one of the most amazing accomplishments of not your life, of their life. And oftentimes we rob people of that opportunity. Don't rob someone of that opportunity if you're serious about working with this issue.
Thank you so much for that, Imam Kaiser. And, I feel, the frustration, and, these are such difficult times. And I know talking to students and people on a daily basis, and even for myself, when we're trying to think of what are the wellness, right? So you were talking about the specific things that are related to, the gaze, right? But, there's also, part of it is, getting that narrative, knowing the triggers, but then also making sure you have alternatives, right? Where are the spaces and places and times that, behavior happens, and how can you move away from that to somewhere else, right? And that may just mean, that could be something like not having, technology in the bedroom and studying in a different room in the house where there's more accountability, right? It could be setting up study dates, right? Like, some of the people, they have these different forums where, you're actually, having like some kind of suhba companionship while you're studying, or what have you. I do think it's important, that you're not invisible. Like, when we do our halakas and things, I encourage people to be unmuted and things like that, for the very reason of what you said. Like, seeing people is important, and being seen is also important, right? And so, we have to be very mindful about that, especially in this time. The other things that, when they're talking about the things that strengthens people's capacity to overcome these things, right? They're the same things that strengthen your capacity to improve relationships overall. If to have greater charisma and all of these other, kinds of things, right? And so we need to take really, and they're all connected to the fitra. They're all connected to the fitra and feeding the fitra. So healthy diet matters, right? Like you mentioned, the reducing meat, but also, processed food and things like that, that matters to your well-being, right? And when you're healthy, you have stronger willpower. Getting quality sleep. When you have not had quality sleep, right, your willpower is very weak, right? And you will be anxious, and you will be depressed, and you'll easily slide into things, right? So, watching the nighttime screen time, the other thing, and this is even for me, like, people see, like, maybe on Instagram, I post a lot of walks. I try to make sure that I get outside every morning and I take a walk, right? I could do other exercise that will get my heart rate up faster and in less time, and probably burn more calories. But being in nature and sunlight is important for my fitra, right? It's important for healing me. It's important for my quality of sleep and well-being. So I try to make sure that I do that every day, right? And the exercise, right? And so, you could be, hit with something, like you're hit with something that feels overwhelming, right? Physically move yourself, right? The Prophet said, people overcome with anger or something like that, or you're standing, sit down, right? Okay, you're having this feeling, go to another place, do push-ups, do something like this, right? Do sit-ups, do crunches, do squats, whatever, right? And until the energy in your body actually changes, right? Get on a conversation with, call your grandmother or whatever, I mean, but even any person, right? Like, because we get, if we're in isolation, we get in our own heads, right? And then the energy just kind of becomes whatever. There's wisdom in the fact that we have jama, right? Because when people go into a jama, right, and they go into prayer together, the energy between one another, it's healing, like you're regulated, hearts and train and all of these different kinds of things, right? So you're not going to go to the masjid, you're not going to go to the prayer area or the library on campus because we're not meeting physically, right? So to really like be intentional about connecting with people virtually, or using whatever people are in your proximity. I have one friend that I go walking with, and she's my buddy, and we get outside, we get that, but you're having that human connection. Sorry, again, another long answer, but
That's very beneficial.
Thank you both. So the next question is as follows. So of course, all Muslim scholars would agree that girls and guys shouldn't share inappropriate pictures of themselves online, like sitting in a certain way or wearing a certain clothing. But some agree that a woman, as long as she is wearing hijab and looking professional, it is acceptable. However, if the woman is very beautiful, even in a professional demeanor, she comes off as attractive and men blame her for their lustful emotions. What should she do? Should she not share anything online, or is that the guy's problem for him to fix?
SubhanAllah. I mean, what an amazing question. What I would say is that we all have to become a little self-aware, right? The lowering the gaze is the first command, right? Not talking bad about people is also a command, right? That speech in itself is a command. It's part of someone's honor. It's a big sin to just start talking about people in the way that they dress. Right? We shouldn't be engaging in that. It's spiritually toxic to do that, right? And then whether you're a man or a woman, right? Think about your intentions. Why are you presenting yourself the way that you're presenting yourself, right? What is your intention, right? And that is just where you have to be honest with yourself, right? And honestly engage with like what are we consuming in terms of imagery ourselves, right? Because what we're consuming as imagery creates norms, right? If you're, I don't know, was it Kardashians or something like that? Like if you're following all of these different images, right? It is going to even, affect your conceptions of beauty, right? And you're impacting yourself with this as well, right? It's one of the things that's happening with social media now is the depression and the discontent that people are feeling with their own appearance, right? That we're because we have Photoshop, because we have all of these things, and now people are going and doing all kinds of unnatural procedures, to look a certain way in photographs, right? Again, this is getting away from the fitra and the natural beauty, right? And so what we want to be able to do is the Prophet ﷺ, he looked in the mirror and he praised God for his beauty, right? That he had a beautiful form, right? And so we should be able to recognize that each one of us has a beauty, right? And to appreciate that, but not to be flaunting that, right? That and to have that attitude of modesty. Kaiser, remember, Kaiser, you want to add anything?
Yeah. slightly to that, and I think that was beautifully said in terms of we can't get to the point where we start becoming ungrateful or not recognizing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Like authentic expressions of ourselves are necessary. So I think the question was very well worded too, and it's a question of where does the responsibility start and end? And I think the answer to that is, and this is going to be the scapegoat answer to almost any question about Islam, is it's going to be balance, right? Ummata wasata, we're the balanced nation. And there's a balance between, there's an expectation given to those that are looking, and then there's an expectation given to those that, in terms of control your appearance. But control your appearance also is to be found in balance. Doesn't mean that no, like what is apparent of your beauty is apparent of your beauty.
Mm.
You shouldn't necessarily have to hide that, because there is a responsibility on the other party. With that said, does that mean you have no control of it? No. And that's where the guidelines come in of, if you're dressing modestly in regards culturally what is acceptable as modest, Islamically what is acceptable as modest, if you're dressing in that way and it's understood that's how you're that you're not an outlier, a significant outlier.
Mhm.
That might be where your responsibility ends. And if someone goes past that, they have transgressed a limit, not you. But this is where the rule of balance comes in terms of, if you find that it's happening over and over again, it could be that the society is wrong, but the wise person first asks themselves if they are wrong. And we do this for almost anything. So let me put it this way. Let's just say that the way I talk to people,
Mhm.
everyone keeps coming up to me and saying, you need to be more quiet. You need to be more quiet, right?
Mm.
I could come up with the conclusion, everyone's ears are too sensitive, right? But a wiser conclusion would be, let me start asking people I trust, whose judgment I really value.
Mm.
Do I talk too loud? Hearing from them and taking that moment to be like, finding where your balance is supposed to be. That's going to be the better approach in this case. So it doesn't have to be, I need to just hide myself completely, but it could be a time of like, if I'm getting a lot of inappropriate comments and it keeps happening, be like, go to someone you trust. Do you think this is fine? Do you think this isn't fine? And have a conversation with yourself in terms of, what will my presentation be? And have others kind of help you curate that identity.
Okay, so next question. Chaplain Patricia mentioned how we shouldn't feel guilty for wanting to look at something when we're told to lower our gaze. Can either chaplain elaborate on this?
I mean, I think what I mean here is to recognize, like, we have these different parts of the self, right? Like, you don't feel guilty for getting hungry every day. I mean, I get hungry every day and I have to eat something, and in Ramadan I'm hungry all day long, right? Until we break the fast, right? But I know that I'm not bad because I get hungry during Ramadan, right? And so that's what I mean by this, to say that there is a natural part of you, right, that wants to connect, to find love and be loved, right? And that part of you is not bad. There's just, what do you do with it and what don't you do with that, right? So you see something, and then you lower your gaze, right? But the fact that you feel an inclination, this could be, natural. Now the question is, what do you do with it, right? If you think it's a possibility, for marriage, then you put it through, a process to find out whether or not it's viable, essentially, right? And if it is, then you pursue it, right? If it's not something, then you just don't look again, right? That's the lowering your gaze, and then you just tell yourself that's not for you, right?
Wonderfully said. I'm just going to add one point to that, and this is it. It's gonna get to a very fundamental aspect of our tradition, where the reason I think it was so powerful, the Chaplain Patty mentioned that, is The believer, when they do something bad, they say, I did bad. They don't say, I am bad. And that statement signifies that. Because when, and I think this is something that needs to be, when that guilt comes in, that guilt is not coming from a place of I'm a terrible, like it's the guilt is proof that of how terrible I am. No, no, no. That guilt is proof of how dignified you are. There's a difference. When you see something you're not supposed to, you feel inclined towards it, you start thinking, I am bad. You're not. You're not. In that moment, you might have messed up the action. I remember you're supposed to say, and the legacy of our father Adam alayhi salam was, I did bad. The legacy of Iblis, Shaitan, is I am bad. We want to follow in the legacy of who? Of our father Adam alayhi salam. I did bad. And part of how that's recognized is by recognizing the gaze, my propensity to not lower my gaze does not prove that I am bad. It could lead me to down some bad actions, but that's a fundamental difference between how you think about it. It's how much dignity you're giving yourself. You're an amazing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't take that dignity away from you. Allah created every single one of us with our problems. So you're not supposed to see it as bad. It can lead us towards bad. Our actions could be bad. We ourselves will not fall into that category. So that's why I think that distinction is very powerful. Jazakallah khairan, Patty.
Okay, so next question. I'm a female who tries to keep her gaze low and stay away from unnecessary chatting with the opposite gender as much as possible. Because I have this, I have grown to a strong shyness around guys. But sometimes I worry that my future spouse might expect me to be a bit more exciting and dominant in our physical life. I know that question sounds weird, but I often worry about how I would be able to open up when I'm married and how that would come off to my husband.
SubhanAllah, what's being expressed there is very, very common. So I applaud the sister who asked that question. It comes up a lot in premarital counseling. And part of the solution is exactly what I just said, is to bring it up in something like premarital counseling. Discussion, healthy discussion needs to be had about intimacy with your spouse. That's one of, not that I want to keep plugging premarital counseling. Go do premarital counseling with someone you trust. There's a lot of good sources for it now, mashallah. Especially if in New Jersey, you're lucky that I can name off 5 different spaces, inshallah, that offer premarital counseling. So I definitely recommend it. But one thing, whenever a couple is with me in premarital counseling, I tell them is, I will be the bad guy who forces you to have conversations neither one of you are bold enough to have. And sometimes it comes down to rules of intimacy start coming down here. They're supposed to be talked about. The more we assume about them, the worse it becomes, because we start realizing people's presumptions are completely off. So that's really what I would suggest here is, one, if you are brave enough to have these conversations beforehand and say it exactly like how that question was posed, like literally tell the person, there should be enough trust to say, by the way, I'm really nervous about this. That should be an appropriate thing to express. I'm really nervous. Can we talk about, and this is going to sound really terrible, but one of the questions I actually ask in premarital counseling is, what do you expect the first night that you're together? Like, is intimacy expected or not? And that sounds like a weird question for some people. It's like, how could you ask that? Other people, it's like, that's such a basic question. But no, we get into that. And we don't start with that question though. You know what the question I start with? What's appropriate in terms of PDA, public displays of affection? When you're around your family, are you allowed to hold hands? When you're out in public, are you allowed to hold hands? Can you hug in public? Can you, like, we get into PDA and what's expected, because if someone can respect you with how you want to be held, with how you want to be talked to, they'll be able to start building language with how you should be intimate with each other. But it requires that channel of communication. And the solution I can give here is either develop the bravery to have that conversation beforehand, or, and I understand that that's very difficult to do, talk about something like premarital counseling. And almost any premarital counselor I've ever talked to, and that's how we start doing premarital counseling, is we all talk to each other and try to figure out what's the best way of making these couples understand each other. Talks about intimacy. So that'll be a way to kind of address the topic if maybe you're too shy to do it yourself.
I think that was a real beautiful answer, and I really appreciate that. And I think also just kind of knowing yourself and your personality, right, and then finding someone that's compatible with you, right. And we shouldn't think that we have all our variety and we have all of our different diversity and temperaments. We shouldn't think that there's like one ideal sort of personality that everyone is looking for or something like that.
Jazakallah khairan. I know that there are dozens more questions that we didn't get to, but if we were supposed to just go until 9:30, it's already 9:50, alhamdulillah. As is always the case, Taboo Topics was meant to be a means to open the doors to addressing this topic, not a means to cover everything that there is about it. Chaplain Patty, I know I could have spoken with you for the next 2 hours on this and not done the topic justice. So inshallah, we'd love to have you at some point in the future back for maybe another taboo topic, maybe a different one than this, but we're really grateful that you took out your evening to join us. I've learned a lot through the course of this conversation, and I'm hoping this was beneficial for those who are watching as well. The questions that weren't addressed, if me or Chaplain Patty could ever be a resource for any of you, don't hesitate to reach out via email. Though I don't want to overburden her, so chaplain@silhu.org, I'll post it in the chat as well. Feel free to send us an email, inshallah, and we'd be happy to meet with you and help you navigate some of these really difficult just both topics, but also just milestones and moments within lives. One of the things, I know most of you have heard this because you hear me all the time, unfortunately, my apologies about that, by the way, is that one of the functions of Chaplain is supposed to be that they help you through a moment of transition. So anytime you see someone like Chaplain Patty, that's what she's really good at. So reach out when you're struggling in moments like that. And with that, my apologies for adding to your plate, Chaplain Patty. But with that, we will conclude. May Allah make us amongst those that beautifully navigate this topic. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that understand what an appropriate gaze is. We benefit from having a gaze that empowers our fitrah, that when we look at things, we appreciate them for their beauty, for their humanity, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with someone who we can express a beautiful gaze with, and that those of us that are struggling with addictions of images, addictions of behaviors, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to control those behaviors and introduce for us halal means for us to address our needs so that we can be closer and closer to our true potential that was actually supposed to be someone who is balanced in dunya and someone who's balanced in understanding what their place in the akhirah is supposed to be. Ameen Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.